Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jennifer Diamond, and I live a whole food, plant-exclusive, sos-free, gluten-free lifestyle for health and well-being, which gave me my life back, and it can help improve yours too. And today, I wanted to bring you along with me while I chat with my new friend, Jason DeSalvo from Cold Brook Farm. Jason DeSalvo and his wife Deborah live and work on their Regenerative certified organic farm in New Jersey, where they practice permaculture, grow fruits, vegetables, and heirloom grains while living in harmony with nature. They live in the farmhouse they built, which generates more power than it uses and is capable of being completely off-grid. They both maintain a whole food, plant-based, sos-free diet. Before becoming a regenerative farmer, Jason co-founded Strategic Outpatient Services in 1995, where he currently serves as the company's CEO. He also serves on several nonprofit boards, including Ethos Farm Project, which is where we first met. I later saw Jason at the more recent NHA conference, and I'm excited to talk to him more here today about regenerative farming and smart, sustainable gardening techniques we can all practice no matter how large or small our spaces are. Please help me welcome Jason DeSalvo. So welcome, Jason DeSalvo, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share with myself and my viewers and teach us a little bit about regenerative farming.
Jennifer, thank you so much. It's great to be here and been looking forward to this for a while.
Yes, definitely. We are going to be able to have you share with us a presentation. We'll answer some questions and then talk about a recipe. And so I just want to ask you, can you tell me about yourself a little bit and about Cold Brook Farm?
Yes. Some of this will be in the presentation, so I won't go into too much detail now.
Sure.
But I'm a regenerative farmer, and Deb, my wife, who's not on camera, we call ourselves accidental farmers. And the reason is, I don't think we thought that we would start a regenerative organic farm when I was 53 years old. So we lived in the town of Montclair, which is in central New Jersey, actually more northeastern New Jersey, about 45 minutes from where we live now in western New Jersey. Raised our kids there and always wanted to live in a place a little bit larger. We long had a home that had native plants and solar power, and we grew some of our own vegetables, but on a very small scale. And we knew we wanted more property, more space, and we also knew that we wanted to do something environmentally really sensitive. And we found this magnificent piece of land in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. And it necessitated thinking on a much larger scale. And you'll see that through the presentation. But one thing I don't know whether I mentioned in the presentation or not, so I'll mention it now. I think both Deb and I share a real passion for environmentalism, sustainability, and we're going to go through not just regenerative agriculture, but what we can do in our own daily lives towards sustainability. And one of the things that we share is doing something kind of all the way. So this project got a little bit ahead of us. It ended up being quite big for a number of years, but we're on the other side of it now. And our grains are actually, if any one of your listeners has ever read The Third Plate by Dan Barber or knows who Dan Barber is, a fantastic locavore movement chef. He actually picks his ingredients. It's got to be from a small farm. It's got to be high quality producer, regenerative agriculture, organic, and it has to taste great. Well, and only in the second harvest from Cold Brook Farms that we did, he took our grains into his kitchen at Blue Hill at Stone Barn. So,
wow. Oh my God. So I'm already getting excited again, and I'm super excited to get into the presentation. And that is just amazing and such a cool thing that you just shared. And I'll just tell everyone that the first time that I saw you or met you was at Ethos Farm, and then most recently at the NHA. And all the things that you started to share and that you did share got me so excited, and like, I just want people to know. And so whenever you're ready, if you want to share your screen, and we could get
We're
into
ready.
your presentation right now.
Let's do it. Let's do
do
it.
it.
All right. So I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to share my desktop or PowerPoint, so I'm going to do this and see how this works, and you'll tell me.
Perfect. It looks wonderful. So whenever you're ready, it looks great. We can see it.
Great. All right. So title is moving toward a more sustainable life. That's our farm in the background. And let's see, I have to now. So I like to start this presentation by showing an image of the Earth. And this was the first picture of the entire Earth that was ever taken. Before 1972 and Apollo 17, we had always pieced together pictures of the Earth from satellite photos. This was the first true whole Earth photo. And it was on the cover of Life magazine, and it has been credited with really changing the environmental movement by making us realize just how small, finite, and fragile this beautiful home of ours is. Sustainable, as a definition, it's able to be maintained at a certain rate or level. Traditionally, when you hear about sustainability, they'll show you some graphic like this, right? Which has society's needs, nature's needs, and the economy. And there are all these three big circles. And in that middle, you have sustainable development. By the way, that is, to me, a misnomer. We live on a finite planet. By definition, you cannot sustainably develop that planet, but that's an aside. I prefer this, which is a more modern graphic, which shows it's placing a value judgment here. And the value judgment is that you're showing the relative importance of these three things. And you'll notice that nature is largest, right? Without that, we really have nothing. Society is secondary to nature, and the economy is last, right? And if you contrast that with what we just looked at, you can see the difference in thinking that has started to pervade more avant-garde thinking about sustainability. One of my favorite quotes by one of my favorite writers, Wendell Berry. For those of your listeners and watchers, if you don't know who Wendell Berry is, check him out. He's a poet, farmer, regenerative agriculturalist, as well as a writer. And this is one of my favorite quotes by him. So whether we and our politicians know it or not, nature is party to all our deals and decisions, and she has more votes, a longer memory, and a sterner sense of justice than we do. So this is a house that we purchased. This is the house that we lived in before we lived here on Cold Brook Farm. We bought this house in 2011. It was built on spec. This was right after the housing crash. It was one of the most beautiful blocks in Montclair. And this house fell into a price range that we could stretch to afford. Again, it was a spec house. It was a lot bigger than we frankly needed, but this is what it looked like when we bought it. And you could see the landscaping was contractor landscaping, lots of lawn, non-native plants, and just, a little bit of ornamental greenery. By 2019, our kids were fully grown. We'd already added landscaping that was all native plants. We added 38 solar panels to the house, and we were both driving electric cars. But we still felt like we had to do a lot more, given what was facing our planet and our human health. And that brings me to another quote from another person who I admire very much, Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So we set out to create a regenerative homestead. That might be an example, an inspiration. So what were our goals? We wanted a home that would minimize its impact on the environment in nearly all possible ways. We wanted to revitalize the surrounding land and environment for all living things, not just us. We wanted to create biological systems that would reinforce one another and improve the health of the land over time. And using regenerative organic agriculture, a conservation and rehabilitation approach to farming that focuses on maximizing topsoil health, increasing biodiversity, improving the water cycle, and enhancing the ecosystem, and increasing resilience to climate change. So this is what we wanted to do, and those are the goals that we gave to the team that was working with us. We found this amazing property that I alluded to when we first started talking in Coldbrook, New Jersey. It was 43 acres. Now, coming from a third of an acre in Montclair, where we actually had landscapers that came to mow the lawn and do things like that, to 43 acres where we were planning to do everything ourselves, it was a bit of a jump. It was one of those momentary lapse of reasons that ended in a fantastic way, but so this is the outline. If you can see my mouse on the screen, this is the outline of our property. And this big farm field in the front is what we had to figure out really what to do with. So we worked with a company named Terragenesis International. And Terragenesis, after we purchased the property in October 29th of 2019, they helped us figure out what to do with all of the land. They work on usually hundreds of acres, sometimes thousands of acres. They've even done projects that are hundreds of square miles. And what they really do is figure out how to keep the land regeneratively used so that it is its highest purpose, not just for human beings, but for nature. Of course, what we started with was a GMO corn and soybean field. And this is what our farmland looked like right after we bought it. It had been farmed this way with chemicals for at least 30 years, and the soil was completely dead. If you tried to dig your hand into the soil, you'd really hurt your fingers. You couldn't get more than a ½ inch in. It was just hard rock clay with nothing living in it. Again, another picture of what it looked like. By the way, this is a picture of me on the left and a picture of the young farmer that we started working with. And we started employing regenerative organic techniques on January 16th, 2020. You'll notice I am a bit stouter there. This was before my whole food plant-based journey. So you'll see a couple of early pictures of me when my face was a bit more round and less angular. So by June of 2020, we had what's called a break crop growing, and this works. This is crimson clover and oats, and it's working to basically pull the toxins out of the soil. We started construction on the farmhouse in June of 2020. First, we built our barn. This was actually August 24th, 2020, the day that they started putting the barn up. And that evening, there was a rainbow that came over the farm, and we thought that this was a good omen. So this is mid-October of 2020, after we had plowed under our second cover crop and we had put in our winter wheat. This was us growing our first crop, and it was einkorn. You can see the house being built in the background and the einkorn coming up. Because you plant winter wheat in the fall, it grows and it stops growing in December when it gets cold, and then it starts growing again in March or April when it warms up. But this is our first real wheat crop. That's New Year's Day, 2021. That's what the house looked like then. This is April 23rd, 2021, when we finally got to start putting some native perennial plants into the ground. Now, we ended up planting over 2,500 native plants, trees, and shrubs since we've been here. And we'll talk about why native plants in a minute. So when we weren't planting something like we're doing on the left side, one of us was hard at work weeding the 10-acre field, right? In a regenerative agriculture system, when you're organic, you don't use pesticides or herbicides. So our 10-acre field, me and or Deborah go through anywhere between 2 and 4 times a season and hand weed it. July 2021, this is our first heirloom grain harvest. And because there are no other organic regenerative grain farmers in our area, we actually had to buy this combine ourselves. It is a used one from 1988, but that really, as it says, it wasn't in our budget. But at the same time, the organic regulations require that we would either have to borrow someone else's combine and clean it out every time we wanted to use it, or have our own combine. And combines are very complex pieces of equipment, and cleaning them all out so that you're not getting pesticide residue or what have you on your organic crop is not easy. So between our day jobs, land stewardship, farm chores, and managing contractors and suppliers, we literally were living 16-hour workdays almost every day. But we also made time to have fun. We were walking around the farm field one day and Deb just dropped to the floor and she's like, take a picture, take a picture. I said, what are you doing? She said, you know, the painting Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. And sure enough, it's pretty much a dead ringer. So we began moving in December 22nd of 2021. I was still drinking back then with our whole food, plant-based, healthy lifestyle. I gave up wine. I grew up in an Italian household where wine was like a vitamin. You know, you had a glass every day. So that's some of the first stuff we brought into the house was the wine to get it out of the car and keep it cool. This was Christmas Eve. We hosted 10 people on Christmas Eve, 2 days after we moved in. You'll see a cheese and a whole bunch of stuff on that platter that we haven't touched in years, but this was 2021. You can see Deb was quite a bit chunkier then too. April of 2022, we're getting our beehives together with EcoBee. And we're starting to plant the thousands of plants that we planted, getting our herb spiral up, our raised vegetable beds. Things are really starting to come together. You can see all the solar panels on the house. The house was designed to create all of its own power. This is behind the house. You could see this is our second spring. This is the wildflower meadow that we planted on top of the septic field, which is where the beehives are. So traditionally in our part of the world, a septic field is a mowed grass field. We worked with a local provider of native seeds to find local native plants that we could plant there that don't have very deep roots, right? Because you don't want really deep roots penetrating a septic field. And we thought it was the perfect spot to put the bees. So they were surrounded by their own wildflower meadow. And we were taking this land that was almost a third of an acre and putting it to good use instead of just letting it sit there as a grass field. So by practicing regenerative agriculture and permaculture immediately, we made Cold Brook Farm a much healthier and more biologically diverse place. And if you look at just some of these photos, we have tons of amphibians, lots of raptors, fox. We've seen on our property bobcat, bear, coyote. We didn't see any of these the first year or two we were there. Now that this thing is a thriving ecosystem, it's amazing what you can see. So this, by the way, is we created a little wildflower pond. And you see in the foreground, we don't use just grass. That is what's called a low-mow mixture. It's got a variety of plants in there. At this time of year, you could see some of the clover in bloom. And it creates habitat for insects. We leave some of those areas very high so that they have three-dimensional space. This was our original permaculture design from July 10th, 2020. This is what it looked like on paper. You could see we had different zones up front. We had the heritage grains crop area, our house, and the zones in close to the house are that small area down here. And then these are areas that are outside of the areas that we do things other than act as land stewards to. And that's the way it actually turned out. So this was a concept, right? We hadn't even broken ground yet. and this is reality. And you'll notice that it looks remarkably similar, just shy of 2 years later. So in September of 2024, this is a bit, it's now September 24, a bit less than 5 years after we started our journey. And the most important impacts we've made thus far towards living a sustainable life with the lowest possible impact on planet Earth have been building a zero energy home that over the past 12 months has generated 6 megawatts more than we've used. That includes all of our driving, because we both drive electric cars. Converting the 13-acre agricultural field to regenerative organic management. This said, by the way, this slide is dated. We are now organic certified. We got certified this year. Utilizing permaculture for all landscaping in the 2 acres surrounding our farmhouse. We've planted thousands of native plants throughout the property. And we adopted a whole food plant-based lifestyle. So these are all things we've done basically over the last several years. So some of the things we did with our home: we have a solar power array with battery backup, ground source geothermal heating and cooling, all electric home, which can be completely off the grid. I can take my cell phone right now, and if I pressed one button, we would go off grid. And we could stay off grid as long as the sun came up every couple of days. Cellulose insulation and T-studs in the exterior framing of the house, which means it's incredibly well insulated. Zip exterior sheathing with rigid insulation, a metal roof. I'm not going to go through all these, but upcycled redwood siding, really, really thermally isolated windows, triple pane windows. Everything that we could was sourced locally, zero VOC materials. We have a 2,500 gallon rainwater catchment system that we use for irrigating our garden. All Energy Star appliances, an EPA rated fireplace, which allows us to burn wood with almost no emissions. And that acts as a backup heating source for the house. All the interior furnishings are natural, like for stuffing in our couches and stuff, it's either organic latex or organic cotton. Permaculture-based groundwater recharge, redundant systems for heat and water, to 48-hour amp car chargers. Everything, all the gravel, all the pathways were all sourced from a quarry that's just miles from the house. With regard to regenerative organic agriculture practices, so it's all about the soil, right? And we'll talk more about this in kind of questions and what have you. But our last non-organic input was January 16th, 2020. We used break crops and cover crops for transition, right? During the period when we were going from non-organic to organic, we had several crops that existed just to get the garbage out of the soil and to put nutrients back into it. And we now grow small grains for human consumption. We try to minimize tillage, right? Because every time you turn the soil, you're breaking up the soil and you're harming the microbiota that live there. So we try to minimize the amount of times we go through the field and till. We use multi-species cover cropping. As I said earlier, we hand weed. We use all natural and organic soil inputs. And our soil organic matter, which is a measure of how much living material or carbon is in your soil, it was under 1% when it was that hard rock clay that I talked about earlier. It's now over 4%. We work with a local cooperative named River Valley Community Grains that wholesales our grain. When we harvest our grain by taste. Yes, it has to be dry enough to harvest so that it doesn't ferment, but then there's a broad window, and most people harvest it just based on the moisture reading. We try to harvest it by tasting it every day while it's becoming ripe and really harvest it at the optimal flavor profile. Because as Dan Barber says, right, in the third plate, food is not just about stuffing your face, it's about great taste and nutrition. And when the grain is optimally ripe, it both tastes great and is at its healthiest. And as I said, our grains have been featured in many prestigious area bakeries, including Blue Hill at Stone Barn. For permaculture and native plants practices, our 2-acre permaculture landscaping includes well over 100 different plants, trees, shrubs, bushes, and grasses. That's varieties, right? So in the 2 acres around our house, rather than having what most people have, which might be grass, which is one, a couple of weeds, let's call that 2 or 3, and then maybe 5 or 6 different types of ornamental landscaping. Maybe the typical American home maxes out at species diversity of maybe 10 or 15 species. We have over 100. Everything exists for a synergistic purpose that either feeds us or other living creatures. We've used innovative designs for the house location, including rainwater catchment, groundwater recharge, and a septic field. The entire house had to be oriented along the south axis so that we could have southern exposure for the solar panels. So everything about the house, where it was placed, how it was built, fit into this permaculture landscape. And now it's 2,500. When this slide was done, it was over 2,000 native trees, shrubs, and plants have been added through the 43-acre property. We have another roughly 800 on order to plant this fall. So we'll break 3,000 this year. Oh, trivia question. What's the best time to plant a tree? Best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time, today. So anyway, probably everyone's heard that. Our landscape provides over 50 different, now it's up to 62, different edible perennial vegetables, fruits, berries, nuts, and herbs. And all of this increases both the quantity and diversity of life. And I wish I could have time-lapse photography for you and the viewers to see over the past 4 years, the number of birds and living creatures that come to visit us each day is astounding. It's really remarkable. You can't walk during growing season 5 feet and not see another creature, whether it's an insect, a reptile, a bird, a mammal. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how much nature heals itself from that dead zone that was the cornfield that I showed you at the outset. Well, then, through agriculture, we got to meet this guy, Ron Weiss. He's the physician owner of Ethos Primary Care and Ethos Farm to Health. That's me and him last year, right around this time of year in September, with a multi-species cover crop in the background on our field. He was here visiting. Our farms are only 6 miles, the way the crow flies, apart. We very often sell vegetables, and well, we always sell our grain at their market, but we often sell vegetables if we have an abundance of things that we're growing that they don't have. So we help each other out that way. And he taught us, and we did not really think about this prior to meeting Dr. Weiss and becoming his patient. And I became his patient because despite being an athlete, I couldn't get my cholesterol down. My cholesterol in early 2022, it was hovering around 250, 253. And my doctor that had been my physician for about 10 years wanted to put me on a statin, and I didn't want to start a statin. So I started working with Dr. Weiss, and the first thing he started teaching me was about whole food plant-based living. By the way, my wife Deborah went whole food plant-based about a month after I did, thank goodness. It made things a lot easier. So in July of 2022, we adopted a diet of entirely whole plant-based foods. So we're whole food plant-based, no added salt, oil, or sugar. So on the left of your screen here, you see Deborah and me in June of 2022, just before we went whole food plant-based, and then in July, 1 year later. Between those two pictures, there are, let me see if I can do the math right. There are almost 80 pounds less of humanity. So I think I lost 30 pounds and Deb lost over 40. So these are my health changes in just 1 year. My weight dropped from about 150 to 100. At its lowest, it was 119. My BMI went from 24.4 to 20.1. My body fat went from 20.3 to 7.8%. My muscle went up from 36.9 to 43.1%. And my resting metabolism dropped because there was less of me to metabolize, right? My visceral fat, which is really, really important. And if your viewers don't know what visceral fat is the fat that lines, it's in the lining that surrounds your organs. And that is the widowmaker fat. That's the fat that's most associated with heart disease and poor health. And unfortunately, nowadays, in our modern toxic world, fat is where your body stores all of the toxins, right? All of the things that it can't get rid of in other places end up in your fat. Heavy metals, all kinds of chemicals, and they end up in your fat. And so optimal health involves getting your body fat level down as low as you reasonably can. And interestingly, even when your body fat level is low, depending on how your specific body type puts on fat, you may still have a high degree of visceral fat. You want to shoot for a visceral fat number that's 4, right? Mine happens to be 3, which is a bit lower than 4, which is great. It was 11 when I started with Dr. Weiss. So that just means there's a lot less fat on my body, and more importantly, a lot less fat in the viscera of my body, which is that lining that surrounds my organs. My cholesterol dropped from 200 to 153. My body age. So there are scales that we can talk about if you're interested. I use the Omron scale that will actually give you an approximation of your physical age based on all of the metrics in your body. And that's your body fat, your muscle content, and the impedance of your body. And mine dropped from, I was 55 when I started a whole food plant-based lifestyle, or actually 54. And I was really proud that my body age was 41. Well, after a year, it was 21. For full disclosure, it's 23 today, but in fairness, I am 2 years older. So, and then finally, as a lifelong athlete, right? My half marathon, I've done marathons as well as many, many, many half marathons. My half marathon pace when I started with Dr. Weiss was actually pretty bad. I had been marathoning at an 8:34 pace when I was younger, but I was pretty heavy for me. So my half marathon pace at the start of my journey with Dr. Weiss was 9 minutes, 4 seconds a mile. After 1 year, it was down to 7:47. And by the way, I didn't change the way I trained. I didn't run any more to get in better shape. That is purely just from eating right, that my pace went down that much. And that's because my cardiovascular system was that much healthier, right? The endothelial lining in my arteries and cardiovascular system was able to respond and dilate in a way that it couldn't when I was eating things like olive oil and cheese and meat and what have you. So based on science, this is the place where we can pause for a second and answer some questions. But based on science, what do you think, Jennifer? And what do you think our viewers would think is the rank order for positive impact we've made on planet Earth, from greatest to least, for the 4 major categories of our work thus far? Remember, we created a net positive homestead. We used regenerative agriculture. We created permaculture and native plants, and we became whole food plant-based eaters. Of those 4, which one has had the most positive impact on our planet?
Okay, that's a tough question because those are all wonderful things, right? That I would think would all make changes, but making the change to the soil, to the earth, to the ecosystem, I'm going to say, would be my number one pick.
Okay. By the way, whenever we do this, unless you are in the room with a diehard community, and I'm not going to tell you which community that knows this answer, no one ever gets this right. And you didn't either, but you did pick a really good one. They're all really important, but here's the order of importance. The least important, and boy, if I knew this, I'd have a lot more money in the bank, right? The least important is the fabulous homestead that we built. I, going into this project, thought that that was the most important, right? When we were on our journey, I thought that that was going to have the biggest impact. It has not only the least, far and away the least. Native plants and permaculture, very important, a quantum leap more than number 4, but still not the most important. The one you picked, regenerative organic agriculture, number 2. Yeah, the single biggest impact as an environmentalist any human being can make on this planet is to change to a whole food plant-based lifestyle. It's wild. Vegan lifestyle, if you're not going whole food plant-based, does the same thing. It's a little bit more energy intensive because there's more processing in that food, but relatively speaking, it's still far and away better than the other 3 here. So yeah, that is pretty wild. And we didn't know that when we started this journey.
Yeah, that's really surprising and super exciting for me to hear because, as you know, I also live a whole food plant exclusive lifestyle. And
Exactly.
I'd like to just ask you a quick question as to how do you measure impact?
This is measuring impact on the cumulative amount. This is doing it on carbon loading and global warming and loss of species diversity, those kind of metrics, right? So things that are harming the planet's biosphere. And the specific, there have been a number of studies on this, and depending on which one you look at, they'll cite different statistics. But for this particular rank order, this is carbon loading and our effect on global warming and climate change. However, it's almost equal with regard to species diversity, biodiversity, and sustainability too. This would be the same rank order for that.
Yeah, a lot of people I would think that electric cars and making sure that you have low energy or zero energy, within the home would think that that would be a big deal because I believe that that's what we've been led to believe. And although, it probably does make some difference looking at your list, it's like not the one that we should be focusing on. So I'm super excited that you brought that up and shared that. And hopefully
So
that will allow people to give
yeah,
plants a
and
chance.
I think the wonderful thing about it is too, it's a heck of a lot more egalitarian to be able to have this list than the other way around. I mean, it always really frustrated me. You need a fair amount of money to do number 4, right?
Right.
If you want to switch to an electric car, yeah, sure. When your car dies and you have to replace a car, if you have the ability to, and the price of electric cars are definitely coming down, and they will be at parity with the internal combustion engine, if not next year, within the next 2 or 3 years. So yeah, that's a better thing, right? When you're replacing your car because it's 10 or 12, 15 years old. By the way, the worst thing you can do environmentally is replace your car every 3 or 4 years. That's an environmental disaster. But if you run your car to the end of its useful life or near it, and you replace it with an electric car, that's a great thing. You should do that if you can. But isn't it great to know that like tomorrow, if you wanted to, you could kind of decrease the amount of non-plant-based food that you eat and have a really significant impact on the environment? I just think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And to put it into perspective, I am under no illusion that we are going to go as a species from where we are now to 100% of the planet eating a plant-based diet, right? But even if we went 10 or 20% in that direction, or alternatively, we had 75% of the people eat plants 25% more often and reduce the amount of animal agriculture that was needed by 25%, that would have a massive impact. But to give you the real spectrum of possibility here, if the entire planet went to a whole food plant-based lifestyle, it would enable us as a species to free up a continent the size of Africa by gaining that land back from agriculture. Why? Right now, we have a very expensive middleman. When I raise plants to feed animals, to feed people, that middleman takes an incredible amount of land, because if I cut out that middleman, meaning the animal, right, I'm raising plants to feed people. And thereby, we could literally save a landmass that's currently devoted to agriculture to raise animals the size of Africa, which is, it's mind-boggling to me.
It's astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Um, I've heard you say before that if a majority of people eat a little more healthy, it's better than if a minority of people eat whole food plant exclusive. And
well, yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, if you think about it right now, I forget what the current percentage of vegan population is. I can't remember whether it's 3% or, but it's in the single digits,
it's a
right?
small. We
It's
could say
small.
small.
It's small. If you had 50 to 75% of the population cut out animal protein 2 or even 3 days a week, think about what percentage that is. It's a
Yeah.
huge difference, right?
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things. Look, not everybody is going to make the jump to a whole food plant-based lifestyle, even though far and away it's the healthiest way to eat. I did it for health reasons. I didn't
Right.
honestly know about the environmental reasons when I did it. That was a very pleasant coincidence. So,
Yeah. And bringing awareness to all the things that you've shared so far and things that we'll still talk about is something that I thought was really important, because a lot of people aren't aware. And I think that's one of the very first steps in making a change, is being aware.
yep.
So I appreciate that. I did want to ask you, so you and your wife Deborah went whole food plant-based for health reasons, but why did you guys decide to become regenerative farmers, going from the beautiful home that you had and the lawn, the stuff that we see typically on television or people live it or whatever, jumping without really having a lot in background? Like, why did you decide to do that?
It was a journey. And it started, like, it happened over time. To be clear, we've been on this journey, since probably 2003 and 2004, in that time frame. Actually a little earlier. We were always environmentally aware. We were actually, it's very funny, we were on the cover of the New York Times style section for having the first two Priuses on the East Coast of the United States. When they first, that Generation 1 Prius, which was not like the modern Priuses, which are not at all a sacrifice, that first Prius was not a great car, but it was the first hybrid, and we both owned one, and an editor of the New York Times heard about that. I've been on the board of environmental charities for a long time. We just have always cared about the environment, and we just every year tried to do a little bit more, right? So hybrid cars, Deb started planting native plants after reading the work of Doug Tallamy. Doug Tallamy is a wonderful author that has really he's a professor at University of Delaware, and he really has, I think he has 3 or 4 books now that talk about the fact that as Earth has become developed, our last real chance to really create biodiversity is in our own yards. We can't really leave it up to massive pieces of land being put aside by governments. We kind of have to do it on our own. We have to make our own little corner of the world be as biodiverse as we can. So Deb started with that in the early 2000s in our old house in Montclair, not even the one you saw there. And then when we moved to this newer house in Montclair, it had perfect southern exposure, and that gave us the ability to do solar panels and native plants there. And then I started learning about regenerative agriculture through really what opened my eyes to that was a movie called Look and See, and it is about the life of Wendell Berry. And when we saw it first, it was not called that. It was called The Seer, and it was in pre-release at the Montclair Film Festival in either 2015 or 16. And they talked about regenerative agriculture in there. And that made me just start reading about regenerative agriculture, never in a million years thinking I was going to become a farmer. But I started learning about regenerative agriculture and the power that it has. If you couple regenerative agriculture with more people eating a plant-based diet, not only can we stop global warming, we can literally reverse it. But the sad reality of it is, how many of our political leaders do you hear talking about that, right? They're talking about incentives for electric cars, solar power, electrifying the transportation system. All of that's really good, right? And all of that plays into, I hate saying this because all of that plays into the perfect capitalist model, right?
Exactly. I was just thinking that. I was just thinking that money.
Right? If we just buy better stuff, we'll fix the problem. Right. Get rid of your old car, get a new car. Get rid of your house, make a new house. Right. Get rid of your appliances. The reality of it is the biggest lobbyists in this country are the food industry and the drug companies.
Yep, pharmaceuticals. Yep.
Neither one of them really want to say, if you just eat vegetables, okay, and make sure that your farmers are farming regeneratively instead of with chemicals, you don't need us. They're not going to say that.
Right.
The only politician that I've heard say that regularly in my presence is Cory Booker. Yeah. Cory Booker is on the agricultural committee in the Senate, and he gets it. He came to Farm Days last year, as you know, right? He gets it, but he's a voice of, one or two in all of Congress. So, I go back to the Margaret Mead quote. We need to generate the knowledge base and the vocal power as people to basically force our leaders to make this change. Because our leaders, they don't really lead. They listen to what they think we want, and then they reflect it so that they're popular, so we vote for them. I'm not complaining about that. That's the system. It's been that way forever. But when I hear people say, we need the government to make tighter rules on emissions so that yeah, that's good. I'm not against that. But regenerative agriculture, how about we decide to eat food that's grown on farms that's not going to kill us? That to me just makes sense. And let's teach our friends and neighbors that by doing that, we're also reversing global warming. And let's build that groundswell that way, as opposed to hoping that we elect someone who will fix the problem, because it won't happen. Right. So how do we get to be regenerative farmers? We knew that we had to farm this property. And once we decided that we had to farm this property, because we fell in love with this piece of property and it was on a big piece of agricultural land, I had already been reading about regenerative agriculture, and I was like, well, this is just what we're going to do. It's the healthiest way to grow food for the biosphere and for us, right? We want to eat healthfully, and we want to make our land more healthy. One of Deborah and my goals when we bought this property was, when we die, this place will be healthier by far than when we started here. So we knew we already had to do something big because we built a house on part of it. By definition, that's not a good thing for the environment. right? Even though it's a very environmentally sustainable house, the reality of it is we took, a half acre that's occupied by house and barn and driveway that now is all impervious coverage, right? So we really wanted to do something to give back. And so we did regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, that is really interesting to even think about. We're living wherever it is, whatever size it is. If you're living in a home, an apartment, or something, that space in the earth is not helping our environment, right? So that's just an interesting way to think of things, because a lot of times in our culture, or maybe, I don't know, bigger, better kind of, keeping up with the Joneses, there's a different focus that has actually nothing to do with helping society or ourselves or the planet, environment, all the things that you touched on. So it's just an interesting new awareness that you just brought up. And so I want to ask you, okay, so how is food from regenerative farm different or better than that from like a non-regenerative farm? And also, apart from the chemicals that you just talk about, chemical exposure from the pesticides and GMOs and all that, is there a difference in the quality of the food? Because I don't know that everybody knows that.
So that's a great question, Jennifer. And to answer it, let's continue in the presentation because I've got some slides. You've kind of alluded to where I was going.
Okay, great.
Which, that's the natural question, right? What does this mean? So Earth's health also depends on what we eat. We were just kind of talking about that. So the world's agriculture and food system, it uses 37% of all the ice-free land on Earth. It's responsible for 70% of the freshwater withdrawals made from the aquifers every year. And it contributes to between 22 and 34% of global greenhouse gas emissions, right? Here's where the human health issues come in and why we want regenerative organic agriculture. So pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides are routinely applied to non-organic agricultural lands in the order of billions of tons a year. This is not a small amount of this stuff, right? It not only affects us by directly exposing us to it. Like if you buy non-organic, non-regenerative, and let me focus on organic for right now, and let's put regenerative aside for a second. If you buy non-organic produce in the grocery store, you are absolutely ingesting some herbicides, pesticides, and maybe fungicides every day, okay? And these are known carcinogens. And I'll get to one of them in particular that's absolutely horrible. They also go into the other animals that because of the runoff, right? And remember, we are the apex predator, right? So when small fish get eaten by bigger fish, get eaten by bigger fish, or when animal feed is produced that has pesticides and herbicides in it, as they are then eaten by their prey, they are concentrated. And by the time they get to us, because we tend to, unless we're plant-based eaters, eat apex predators like tuna, right? Tuna fish. That's an apex predator. Salmon, apex predator. Cattle, not an apex predator, but they are fed feed that comes from a whole bunch of things that are grown with herbicides and pesticides and chemicals. By the time it gets to us, the food is loaded with these things, but it also affects the chemical and biological property of the soil, okay? And what it tends to do is kill everything in the soil. Remember what I told you about the fact that our soil was dead? Now, after almost 5 years of regenerative agriculture, when I grab a handful of soil, I'm going to show you what it looks like in a minute, instead of being hard clay, it's loaded with things like earthworms and a whole bunch of other things, and I'll share that with you in a slide coming up. This stuff, glyphosate, okay? If there are only two takeaways from everything I present today, for the people that watch this and listen, I would like it to be the following two things. Number one, you're changing the way you eat to a more plant-forward diet or plant-based diet is the singularly highest impact you can have on planet Earth in a good way that you're capable of. Now, that doesn't mean you do that and you still drive a car or vehicle that's 5 times the size you need just because you want to, or you buy lots of packaging and just throw it away because you don't think about how things are packaged. You should be doing those things too, but changing the way you eat towards a plant-based diet is number one. Number two, if you or anyone that works on your property, around your property, uses that stuff that's, it's based on glyphosate and it's called Roundup.
Roundup, yes.
If you use that because you don't like the look of weeds in between the cracks of pavement on your property, stop doing that. Throw this stuff out. It is a known carcinogen. It causes birth defects. It's an endocrine disruptor. It is a highly, highly, highly powerful antibiotic that completely destroys your gut bacteria, right? It also damages cellular DNA, right? This stuff is one of the worst inventions in the history of man, and it is also one of the most profitable things that the Bayer Company, formerly Monsanto, has ever made, because we like our nice, tidy little suburban lawns or what have you. If you ingest this stuff, all the work that you've done to reinvigorate your gut biome by eating healthfully, by exercising right, by getting enough sleep, it gets wiped out. So if for no other reasons than selfish, get this stuff out of your world. They are now finding this in the rain. They have found it on the Greenland ice shelf because it's used so pervasively in agricultural land all over the world. America is the biggest user of this stuff. And if you're not buying organic produce, you are absolutely eating this 100%. So why is it important? And why?
I want to just stop you for a minute and just ask you. So if someone's listening and they say, well, if I spray this bottle of Roundup, glyphosate, onto a crack in front of my house or backyard to prevent a weed from growing up, how does that get into my system, right? And maybe you can answer this, but what I'm thinking is that enough of it in a bigger scale, we do breathe it in. It does go in the air. Our skin is porous. Is that kind of the way that you would explain that to someone?
Well, yes, there's that. There's no question. If you get it on your skin, it's going. I mean, remember, your skin is the largest organ in the body, right? And it's highly absorptive. So if you get it on your skin, it's going into your body that way. If you breathe in the mist, it's going into your body that way. But even if you're judicious with that, you wear a respirator, you completely suit up, the way if you read the instructions you're supposed to do, which no one ever does. I mean, when I see my neighbors, actually not in this neighborhood, but when I used to see my neighbors in Montclair doing that, they're out there in shorts and a t-shirt spraying away. You know, they're just boom, 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 boom. When you're doing that, where do you think it goes? It goes into the groundwater. It doesn't just stop. It doesn't just sit there on the surface, kill the weed, and then say, I'm gone. It goes into the groundwater. And then the groundwater evaporates and goes into the rain. Remember what I just talked to you about? It's in the rain now.
Yes.
Because when you spray it, if it's a hot day, some of it goes into the soil. The other gets evaporated. That goes into the rain. That gets rained down into our aquifers that you and I then drink. So it's the ultimate act of human hubris to forget that we essentially are living in a fish tank. And as a kid, did you ever own a goldfish maybe?
Yes, I did.
And you know how you kind of forgot to clean the tank every once in a while and it got really gross?
I do recall that.
That's kind of what we're doing to our beautiful planet, right?
Wow.
We just keep pumping stuff into it, but there's no one to clean it. You know, you can't just come in and empty all the water out and scrub it and put the fish in a little plastic bag and then put them back in clean water. We have one atmosphere, one set of oceans, and one set of soil. And if we destroy it, it's not very good. So this is what our soil looks like now. It's this beautiful kind of what they call chocolate cake. And if you look closely enough, you can see these little white filamentous strands in there. Those are called mycorrhizal fungi, okay? They're the same fungi that are in our own gut biome when it's healthy, okay? And these organisms act as a pathway to boost the nutrient uptake in plants that are grown in soil that have them. So here's a really sad fact, but a very necessary one to talk about. As human beings, we have two mechanisms that determine that we're full. In other words, when we're eating, you know how we stop? We have two mechanisms that do that. One is the stretch sensors in and around our stomach, that as our stomach stretches, it says, hey, buddy, you've eaten enough, right? Now, one of the reasons a whole plant-based diet is great with that is it's really bulky. For me to get too many calories by eating a kale salad, I got to eat a lot of pounds of kale. And my stomach's going to have plenty of time to stretch and say, stop eating. On the other side of the coin, if I eat a couple of pieces of cheese pizza with some extra olive oil and anchovies on top, I may never stretch my stomach, and I may have had enough calories for 2 days, right? So there's one way that we get sated. The other way we get sated, and this is really important for people that are already on the whole food plant-based journey, our body's second mechanism is based on nutrient satisfaction, and the body having sensors that knows it is eaten nutrients that it needs to function. And sadly, over the last 100 years in the United States, the nutrient density in the food that we eat has decreased dramatically. And it's done that because, let's go back to what I said before and what we both had a chuckle sadly about, good old capitalism, okay? Even an organic tomato, organic, not regenerative, an organic tomato that basically is not nutrient dense, but organic, it's sold by weight, right? So the person selling the tomato cares about one thing. How can I get a variety of tomatoes that plumps up quickly, doesn't rot, and weighs a lot, so I can get the maximum dollars out of my land, right? And so what you're left with is something that looks like a tomato. It may be organic even, okay? May taste or not anything like a tomato. More often than not, it usually tastes like wood, right? Because they take them off the vine very ripe before they're nutrient dense because they ship better that way. So all of this is to say, I have noticed in my own self, in the summer, when Deborah and I are eating vegetables that we grow or that we buy from Ethos or any other local regenerative organic farm, I eat less quantity than I tend to want to eat in the winter. I attribute that to, and I also feel better, I'm getting food that is maximally nutrient dense. And that should be your goal. Eating is fuel. And yes, part of eating is enjoyment, but an important part of it is to properly deliver nutrients to the human body. And so when you're eating regeneratively, organically grown food, regenerative soil has these mycorrhizal fungi, as well as millions of other little microorganisms that act in a symbiotic way to grow very healthy food. And that's what's important. It's not quantity. It's not, I ate a pound of tomatoes, a pound of kale, a pound of berries. It's, did you get the nutrients out of those foods? And if you're eating regeneratively grown food, you're getting that nutrient kick from 100 years ago, not the current modern day nutrient scarce food that's, you go into Whole Foods, most of that produce is not grown regeneratively, even the organic stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, we don't always have that option. I can't get regeneratively organically grown produce very often in the winter. So what do? I eat organic produce, right? But if you can, if there's a local farm near you, or if you take it upon yourself in your own small piece of land, or even if you live in an apartment and grow some things on a terrace outside and do them regeneratively organically, you are doing your health such an incredible service, as well as the earth. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, that really does. And, we like, because we can't all buy land and start a farm. But like you were just mentioning, people that live in apartments or or urban neighborhoods that have just small areas like a windowsill for an herb garden or maybe a backyard garden bed. Maybe they only have one or two. Like,
Yep.
what can we do to incorporate some of these practices
Sure.
um, for those people?
Well, there's a lot.
And does it matter? I want to throw that in
Well,
there.
does it matter for your own health? Absolutely. By way of example, you can buy online a very easy starter kit to grow broccoli sprouts in your house. Um, and you can incorporate them into your salads. They're easy to grow. You grow them in a week or so, and you can grow enough that you never need to buy sprouts at the grocery store. Now, are you going to show me? Are you going to show me that you're doing that?
Here we go. So you're right. This takes up very little space.
Yep.
And I have broccoli sprouts that I'm soaking because it's time to do it. And I also have green lentils. So, yes, great.
So yeah, and by the way, folks at home, we did not plan that, right? It's just that's an easy one, right? You can again, we're talking aside from supporting small regenerative farms by buying their product, and now, interestingly, with the world the way it is, this was an interesting question. Going back to eating organic produce, even out of season, where it has to be imported, and you have the global warming issue of transportation, is still preferable to eating the typical American diet from an environmentalist standpoint. You are still making less of an impact on the world, not as much as if you grew the stuff in your own backyard, but far and away, you're putting less carbon dioxide into the world with that transportation of your tray of blackberries to your home from California, if it's the winter, than you are if you are eating a steak, right? That's math. That's true. So you can grow your own herbs. You can grow your own, your own sprouts. You can grow your own little herbs inside. You can do whatever it is, and those will be as healthy as that's as healthy as it gets. Again, those are not actually going to be as nutrient dense as if they were grown in soil, but that also takes longer, it's more work, and it really depends on where you are. The reality of it is there's no perfect. And I can think of 100 other things that Deb and I could and should do. That doesn't stop us from doing what we can do. So do what you can. Maybe grow some of your own sprouts. If you can, I don't know, get a grow light and grow a tomato plant. You'll have the best tasting tomatoes you've had, right? Other than maybe being in New Jersey in the summer. Do stuff like that. Other things with regenerative agriculture, if you have a yard, you step up to a whole different ability to do something. I mean, in one 4x8 container, right, you can grow an incredible amount of your own vegetables. We grow all the kale and lettuce that we eat for Deb and me from one 4x8 container from basically April-ish through roughly when they get infested with I forget the name of
Those little aphid things.
yeah, those, and then there's a cabbage butterfly that loves laying.
Oh gosh. Do you know what? I know it.
Yeah. Now
I do know it.
we're lazy. I really should build enclosures that enable them to be covered, but I don't. So anyway, so for about 3 months, literally all of our lettuce, kale, and collards come from one 4x8 bed for the two of us, right? If you've got two or three 4x8 beds, you get into a whole other order of magnitude that you can do. And you basically start by ensuring that you're using healthy soil to start with. If you don't know how healthy your soil is, get it tested, right? What you don't want to do is if you live in a suburban setting or even a rural setting, you don't want to dig up some dirt from your garden and start planting your food in it without knowing that the person that owned that place before you didn't decide it was a good idea to dump toxic stuff there, right? I'll give you a perfect example. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, who I loved, I distinctly remember as a little boy, he had this space right outside of his garage where he would, any horrible, noxious thing that came out of his workroom just got poured into the ground there. I didn't know any better as a little boy. I was like, oh, that's what you do, right? If anyone decided to grow vegetables there after he sold the house, remember, there's no regulation on that. So get your soil tested if you're going to do a lot of your own home growing. It makes a lot of sense. And as long as you're starting with healthy soil, you can add to it by adding compost. And over time, you can create really, really healthy soil in which to grow food. And that's a
Yeah.
whole other topic of conversation of how to do
Yeah.
that.
And just to follow up with that, if somebody was interested in testing their soil, I'm sure they could go online and look up places wherever they live where they could mail away or drop off samples. Is that right?
Correct. If you just Google, organic soil test near me or healthy soil test near me, and look at some Google reviews and look at they'll tell you how to do it. We send our stuff up to the University of Massachusetts. They have a great soil testing program, but we already know our soil is healthy. We're really just testing annually for nutrients to see whether or not we have to add manure or something like that to the field. So yeah, that's a great way to.
Yeah, because a lot of people talk about testing water. And so, right, I never thought you should and you could test where you have and what you're working with. I think that's great. You also had said something earlier in the presentation. I just wanted to take a minute. Nature heals itself. And you know what? That reminded me of it the same way that food has the ability to heal us. It happens in any aspect. And I just wanted to point that out.
Well, the amazing thing, Jennifer, I showed you my 1 year slide, right? And I showed you my cholesterol going from, it went from 235 to 153, right? Well, it went from 235 to actually it went from 200. That's when I started keeping track. But it went from 200 to 160 in 3 months, right? And I felt better in a month. It's just the human body will heal itself if you just stop hitting your head with a hammer, right?
Right.
I forget, one of the very famous authors in this space talks about the fact that most people eat roughly every 3 hours. And if what you're eating every 3 hours is harming you, right, you've just about digested it and just about given your body a chance to rest when you hit it with a hammer again. Then you wake up in the morning and do it all over again. So anyone that hasn't eaten a truly healthy diet has actually never felt what it's like to be healthy, because your body is constantly basically repairing itself from the damage that you're doing to it. It's a remarkable thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't get a break. I'm just got a couple questions left over, but are there certain foods that you would recommend for beginners? And I know it depends on your zone, and it probably depends on a lot of different factors, your space. But is there anything that you would recommend just from a small overall?
Overall, things that are really easy to grow that I love. Again, one of them is kale, right? And that is a cool temperature plant. Kale and lettuces. Like lettuce, you can sprinkle a lettuce mix in salt in soil. And that's, cool climate stuff where you would start in, like in our area of the world, You would start it in, say, March, and you're going to get lettuce that's harvestable by end of April, early May. You can do that with kale. I love growing carrots. They're easy to grow, they're abundant, they're so delicious. You can pull them right out of the soil and eat them. And if you've got healthy soil, you're even getting some B complex vitamins, or you're getting B12 in there from the stuff in the soil.
That's
Snap peas,
incredible to think.
yeah.
That's incredible to think. Oh my
It
gosh.
is. Sugar snap peas, love them. They grow abundantly, and there's nothing better than walking outside and picking a handful of them and eating them. Tomatoes, tomatoes. If you live in a part of the world where tomatoes will grow, they're lovely too. Those are all real easy things that there's tons of stuff online about how to grow them. They're not terribly complicated. And they all are things that fit into even a normal diet, right? We all have lettuce at some point, even if you're putting it on a hamburger. We're slicing a tomato wedge to go in a salad with mozzarella. If you're not willing to be whole food plant-based, those are all really good things to grow. Sprouts indoors, super easy, super fun. And the turnaround on them is so quick that you just feel like you've accomplished something major 2 weeks later. So those are all ones I like right off the top of my head.
Those are great suggestions. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I also want to ask you, because I heard you were talking at one point about not growing, like if you do have a space to grow a bed or whatever, not growing the same things in the same places
Yeah.
over and over each season. I'm just wondering if you could just touch a little bit on that and why that
So
is.
crop rotation is vital for a number of reasons. Let me show you, I'll go back, I'll show you a slide. So there's two reasons to rotate. First of all, we use something called cover cropping, right? This is what our field looked like right maybe 3 weeks after harvest, okay? What we had done was we had grown wheat on this field. And remember, I told you we planted the wheat in October, and then we harvested this wheat in July. But in March, when the ground was frozen, it was either February or March, we went through the field with a little golf cart type thing with a seed, like the same kind of push seeder that you see people pushing on the lawn, except it goes on the back of a golf cart type thing. And we went up and down the field and we broadcast red clover. Okay. So that red clover started growing in April and May, but then the wheat got so high that it slowed the growth of the clover because it drowned out the light. But that clover was still there. After we harvested the wheat, it became the primary crop, so that this is what our field looks like 3 weeks after harvest. That's a regenerative field. We also use crop rotation, which I'm going to talk about, but what I want to show you is that is what a conventionally managed field looks like after harvest. There's no cover cropping, right? So when it rains, half of your soil runs off. That's our field 3 weeks after a harvest. That's a conventionally managed field 3 weeks after a harvest.
Wow.
Pretty different. The other thing is, and you know what, let me just, there's a couple more slides here and then we're done with slides and we can go back to, these are some resources that people can take a screenshot of. These are all websites. There's our website, Cold Brook Farm. We have a whole FAQ that deals with a lot of the questions that you're intuitively asking. They're answered there in writing.
Perfect.
Ethos Primary Care, that's Dr. Weiss's medical practice. If people are interested in whole food, plant-based eating, great resource. Obviously, you're another great resource.
Thank you.
And then these bottom ones for people, I do a whole talk on grain and the importance of whole grains. And maybe we'll do something together on that. But these two are really, Pleasant Hill Grain is a great place to buy a grain mill if you want one. And Old Ways Whole Grain Council is a great place to go. They have something on their website that lets you put in your zip code and it will direct you to local farmers that grow grain for you. Now, also a shameless plug for us. Oh, well, this is for Ethos. If you live, I doubt this will be published by the time that that this has happened. But each year, like you alluded to, we do farm days at Ethos, and it's a great place to talk about all of these things and learn about it. This year's is September 14th and 15th. And then finally, our website again, we will be going live with our online store. So if you're interested in what products we have to offer, like right now in the online store, we've got our heirloom garlic, we've got honey. I know that's not vegan, and we started with our honey hives before we became whole food plant-based. We actually, frankly, don't eat much of it. But it is, according to the EPA, who tested ours, one of the healthiest honeys they've ever tested, which is fantastic. And then we also have our grains. So we sell our grains, and you can get really great quality wheat and oats in our farm. So,
yeah. And you said that you were going to offer a link for us to provide for our viewers, and they
yes,
would be able to get.
In the notes, you'll be able to get 10% off anything in our online store just for being a fan of Jennifer's and for sitting through all of this. So back to moving around. If you're growing a garden plot, right? Don't grow the same thing every year in the same dirt. If you only have a small patch of dirt, then rotate. You want to be on like a 3-year rotation. Let's say you only had one planter, okay? Plant one thing this year, maybe do tomatoes this year, okay? When the tomatoes are done growing, don't just pull them out and leave empty dirt. Plant a cover crop. Plant some red clover. The idea behind regenerative agriculture is there should always be roots in the ground, right? That symbiotic relationship between what's above ground and what's below ground. As much of your year as possible, you want to keep things growing. And then next year, so maybe I do tomatoes this year. At the end of the season, I pull the tomatoes. And in September, I plant some red clover in there. That's going to overwinter. Depending on how cold your winter is, it may die or not. If it doesn't die before it goes to seed in the spring, turn it back into the soil and let it get absorbed by the soil for 2 or 3 weeks before you plant your next crop. If you planted tomatoes this year, don't plant a nightshade or what have you next year. Do beans next year, right? Either string beans or sweet peas or something like that, or carrots, right? Go on a 3-year rotation cycle. If you're lucky enough to have multiple planting areas, rotate through them. You don't want to have something from the same type of vegetable or fruit in the same soil more often than every 3 years. The reason is twofold. Number one, different plants use different nutrients and you won't deplete your soil. Number two, and equally importantly, and in some cases more, it doesn't give pests a chance to get a foothold. If like we were talking about the cabbage butterfly, if I plant in the same bed every year, kale, cabbage butterfly larvae and stuff, they'll know that that's where they go for kale. And next year they'll be there on day 1 instead of day 60. So you want to shake things up that way.
Yeah, and that also keeps the soil alive in between. And that's the whole purpose of this, is to realize that we need our soil to be alive and not be dirt.
Exactly.
And that's so important. So this was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate everything you shared and all your slides. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of awareness and hopefully be inspired to try something wherever they are. And so I just want to ask you, is there anything else that you think is important that we maybe didn't touch on that you want to close out with this part of it?
Yes, very important. I've been dying to eat the crackers that are sitting next to me. And so we are going to give a recipe to you, a whole food plant-based recipe that Jennifer will provide to you. And she's got many of the ingredients right next to her. And so I wanted to show you, I assume you're doing the crisp bread cracker. Is that the one you did?
Yes, yes. So just to for a second to take a step back, right? You have all of these beautiful whole grains and different things that you grow, and then like what do you do with it, right? So this kind of allows people to see a recipe of a finished product. And so you were kind enough to share a couple recipes, which we will have available for everyone. And I'm not able to go out and go get it from you right now because I'm in Arizona, but I do have some ingredients, and I did do the crisp bread. It is a whole grain sourdough cracker, but I made it gluten free. And anyways, I have some ingredients. I did change up. You had talked about either using honey or date paste. And
Yep.
I went ahead and used date sugar in mine, which is just dehydrated dates.
Yep. You can
So,
use date sugar. You can use date syrup. You can, that makes it whole food plant-based. Obviously, if you use honey, you blow it out. You're not vegan anymore, and then you're also not whole food plant-based. And wherever you fall on the spectrum with that, I applaud you. We won't get into the political discussions on that, but
right.
yeah, that's a great approach. And I
Yeah.
love.
And then the last thing I'll just share is I had sorghum flour and millet that I
Yep,
used. And so those
fantastic.
are how I made your recipe gluten free.
Fantastic. And you can use any of your favorite grains to do that. The ones that I make with rye flour and oats. Um, and one of the things in whole food plant-based eating, the two recipes that I gave Jennifer are, and again, you could mix and match different grains. So if you're gluten-free, use gluten-free grains. If you're not, you can use exactly what I offered there. Our oats, by the way we process our oats, they're processed in a completely different year than our wheat. So I can't call them gluten-free per se because they're not specifically tested for gluten, but it would be really weird if my field had oats on it one year, wheat a next year, and there was any transference of gluten. It's totally,
Yeah.
so we keep them in separate bags. We keep them in separate parts, and they're in separate bins. So anyway, if you do,
I'll just share with you that when
yeah,
we were at NHA and you brought the grain and you milled it. I mean, it was so fresh. And then there was a morning when we
you
were
all
able
had our
to eat
oatmeal.
it, and
Yep,
I had it. And
yep.
I'm not celiac, but I am gluten sensitive. I felt good, so
No, and we do even have customers that are celiac that do eat our oats. They were very wary at first, but we're,
yeah.
it's
So if you want to order from Cold Brook, and try it, you might be really pleasantly surprised that it doesn't bother you and I'm not saying if you're celiac, you should check
yeah,
with
if
your
you're
doctor.
celiac, you should be careful and deal with it as if you would any unknown product. But if you
Yeah.
have an aversion to gluten or a slight allergy to it, you can eat these oats all day long and you should be fine. I wouldn't say that of our wheat. That's a whole other story. But so yeah, you're showing me, okay. So,
I actually got crazy here. I did it two ways, but yes, tell me what
well, the ones on your right, that's the way mine end up looking. And this is an example. I also, because I'm using a grain that's a darker grain, but I also, those to me look like you may need to re-crisp them a little bit more. If you bite them and they're not completely crunchy, go ahead and give a crunch. Break
Okay,
it. Let's see.
ready?
Yeah. Did it crunch?
It's crunching.
All right. Very good. Then you got it. So I'm going to have mine.
Oh yeah, these are delicious. These are
Yeah.
great. And
So,
I made these in the oven the way you said. And then I
mhm.
got like I just wanted to try because I always like to try new things. I took some of it and I put it on a tray and I dehydrated it in the dehydrator. And
Wow.
I did not have a chance to score it like these. You teach how to score it in the recipe because I was already going to bed. But
Right.
I thought I would show it and we could crack it here just in case you haven't done this. So look
I
at,
haven't. Do show.
Yeah, so here we go. And I can just break a piece off.
Ooh, that is one gadget I haven't yet bought, and I'm getting very tempted.
Yeah, so
Do you
I
have a
have the
recommend? Do you have a recommendation for a
I
dehydrator?
do, yes, and I'll be happy to share it. I use the Excalibur. I have the 9 drawer. I can bring it over here if you want. They sell smaller ones, but I went ahead and got the 9 drawer. And yeah, you can do all kinds of things in the dehydrator. And I'm that kind of person where I always like, well, what happens if we would do this also? And so
Love
I'm
that.
glad we did, and I'm going to taste it to let you know the difference in the
See how
texture.
they compare. Yeah,
I mean, they're very similar. They both have a great crunch. Um, Gosh, I really like them both. I think it's a win either way.
that's
And
great.
so I just thought that that would be fun to share with you.
And we haven't added a recipe section to our website yet, but we will be doing that. We will ultimately get a Cold Brook Farm cookbook out one year. When we have enough time, it'll undoubtedly have to happen in the winter. But in the meantime, Deb and I are both very responsive by email. So if you go to our website, there's a contact form in there, and you can just shoot us an email and we'll get back to you if you have questions.
That sounds great. I just want to take a few minutes just to thank you again so much for all of the wealth of information that you shared with all of us, the recipes, the education, and just the encouragement and the awareness to allow people wherever you are to just try to make a small change, like you were saying. And overall, it's going to make a huge impact. I just want to also say, don't forget to eat your greens and give plants a chance. Thank you so much,
Yes.
everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Take
Take
care.
care. Bye.
Bye for now.